my gosh, that was incredible. Junk Films, PBS, oh my goodness, wow. I just had the weirdest experience of getting teary-eyed, watching myself get teary-eyed. So I don't know if that's like Olympic level narcissism or what, but it, it was the strangest thing ever. Now we're going to go into some Q&A. But just want to mention too that if you'd like to see this exhibit, we saw the preparation for it, but it's at, what you saw at the very end there was that beautiful building. That's the Brand Library and Art Center in Glendale. And also just wanted to give a really huge and special thanks to the city of Glendale. I know Jennifer is here. You're going to hear from her in just one second, but she's been our partner the whole time. And there's no way we'd be able to do this project without this incredible collaboration with Glendale. So thank you. Thank you. But right now I'd like to bring up somebody very special who's had a really big influence on our project too. Dr. Lois Rawson, who's the NASA field historian. And I learned that the field historian, that means that she's out in the field and sort of capturing history as it happens. Lois was a curatorial advisor for the project and really help us understand some insights of what we're doing that we didn't even see. And prior to working as the NASA historian, Lois studies sort of the continuation of the Western frontier in space, right? And just a really interesting topic. Was also a fellow at the Huntington Gardens, the Octavia Butler Fellow. And so I'd like to invite Lois up here now. She's going to moderate the Q&A for us. And then everybody else who would like to kind of join us at the table for Q&A, Nick, Richie, Jennifer, Rafi, and Dan. And I'll pass it to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, raise your hand if you also got teary-eyed watching David get teary-eyed, because I definitely did. That was incredible.
Yeah.
I'll wait here, let everybody get settled in. Wow. Well, first, thank you all for coming here. This is definitely the largest panel of the day, so it's definitely a party up here. And so much of what is in this film is so resonant with so many of the conversations that we have had in this room over the course of this day, and also more broadly in thinking through some of these projects that are part of PST. So since there are so many of you, and you guys are all involved in this project in such an incredible capacity of ways. I was wondering if we could just go down the line and you could just very briefly introduce yourself and say how you touched this project. So Rafi, maybe since you are most physically proximate to me, we'll start with you and then we'll go down the table.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Rafi, and I worked on Earth Speaks, which was the poetry installation.
Hi, I'm Nick Shaw Kim. I'm the senior producer of arts and culture at PBS SoCal and the producer of Artbound. Thank you.
I'm Richie Culture, director from Junk Films.
Dan Goods, I lead the studio at JPL.
David Delgado, cultural strategist, and led the research for this project.
I'm Jennifer Kutomi-Jones, and the principal arts and culture administrator with the City of Glendale.
Wonderful. So the first question that I wanted to ask you guys is for you, Nick and Richie. I really wanted to hear a little bit more about how PBS arrived at this project. How did you guys learn about it? I didn't realize how long you guys were immersed in the development of this project either. I loved the day-long countdown to launch. And so could you guys say a little bit more about what it was like for you guys as artists embedded in a system where you were watching other artists embedded in a system making art about science? What was that process like?
Sure, I'll start. We were actually reached out to by the studio. I don't know how you found us, but apparently you're familiar with our show Artbound. And you reached out to me on my personal website, which was the oddest thing because I never checked that. But what was intriguing to me about this idea was that I think art and science sort of suffer from this sort of heightened barrier of entry, right? Like I think a lot of people could be afraid of sciences. Similarly, they're afraid of the arts, like museums and galleries may feel like uninviting spaces. And I thought, well, what a challenge it would be to tell a story where art collides with science and make it feel very approachable and heartfelt. I approached Richie first. We had worked before in the previous season, and we really enjoyed working with Junk Films, and we thought, well, this was the potential for putting together a very visually kind of compelling film that was absolutely in your wheelhouse, and we just started talking. But it really began with a simple email from the studio, reaching out at like, hey, would you be interested in helping us sort of tell this story?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, PBS has a process for every season that we aren't necessarily a part of as an external collaborator, and then at some point they have developed it to the point where they want to bring it to a team like ours, and they give us options, and we talk through options, and they're very diplomatic, I guess, in a sense. Like, here's some of the topics that we can talk about this year, and we have other teams, and we're trying to figure it out, but here they are, and then they're kind of Nick was listing them on a call, Zoom call, and I had like some of my guys on the call, but they weren't participating. They were kind of like taking notes, and then you went through, and then you mentioned this topic, and my guys were like on Slack, like texting it. That one. We want to do that one, and so it became like very quickly the choice, just for so many reasons, and yeah, it was an honor.
I would say that for a while we've been trying to figure out a way to tell a story about art and space exploration. I've been sort of just finding like little stories here and there, like artists having their work blasting off into space, or the Golden Record story is another famous story. But it wasn't until when Dan and David reached out till we figured out, oh, this is really a way to tell a story about JPL and the intersections between art and science, because it's absolutely there. So thank you so much for reaching out.
So one of the conversations that we've been having in different capacities all day is, the challenge of visualization. Was there anything that was especially difficult about this story in terms of translating it for the screen? Was there anything that you guys saw that didn't make it into the final cut that you want to highlight for us?
That's a 4-hour movie. There's like a full hour on just Dan and David's history and how they met and their career. That had to be cut down to, because it's broadcast, right? Like,
You gotta see that.
we have laws.
So much.
It was really hard. I mean, there was a number of things that excited us from the jump, and then there were challenges along the way. But like for example, like from a filmmaking perspective, we wanted to film artists and scientists very differently in the beginning, and then over time kind of start to blend them a little bit. And so we shot the scientists' interviews on some very clinical glass. They're like very sharp, modern lenses. And then the artists, we started to shoot on like Soviet-era Helios lenses. They were just like from the 60s, because they just look fantastic in a very different way. You see in Rafi shot the most, the center cut interview shot of him, the trees behind him are like just kind of warped. And then over time, start to mix those lenses up a little bit. And so swap, I think later on in the film, we shot Liz on both lenses. And then, so the idea is over time, and I'm sure this is like very subtle, and this is like a nerdy filmmaking thing, but like, it's there, over the length of the film, they just like kind of come together, right? And so, yeah, there was a symbolic nature to it from that perspective, and we just wanted to kind of nerd out. In terms of challenges, I don't know. I mean,
I would say just going through all the archival, because there's such a wealth of it.
But that was fun.
Yeah, I mean, but like I remember I was like, Dan, can you send me your entire photos library? And you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rector Internet, right?
Yeah.
Challenges. I wouldn't call them challenges so much as just more points of exploration. And it was thrilling just to
Yeah.
go through all that archival.
Yeah.
From a producer's point of view, that's gold for me. I just love it.
That's really great. Well, I'm definitely here for the 4-hour version once you guys put that out.
Come check it out on the server at the office. It's there.
So my next question is sort of obliquely for Jennifer and for Rafi. One of the parallels I think that frequently get drawn between art and science are the sort of dual narrative of like the great man of science and then like the great artist sort of working alone in his studio. And I think that one of the things that's so powerful about this project is that it's team science and it's collaborative art, right? And there's so much trust that is highlighted in this process, not just in your own work as a professional to like do this work successfully, but also to trust your colleagues to like be experts in their field. So Rafi, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it was like to collaborate with Liz on this project and then also with the team at large. And then Jennifer, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about what it was like looking at this project from the perspective of the city of Glendale, right? And so like, you know, from one large entity to another large entity, right? Like the city of Glendale to the Jet Propulsion Lab. What was the gestation project of this? What was the gestation time of this project and what did that look like? So maybe Rafi, let's start with you.
Sure, thank you. I want to start by recognizing the moment in the film where they talk about how arts and sciences have shared so much historical unity, and there was that visual of Atkins, Morse, Da Vinci, Frank Molina, so it was very well established early in the film that the sense of synergy that exists, and you know, shout out to Junk Films and PBS for really making that clear. And so as far as the collaboration and meeting Liz, you know, it was really just one step at a time and trying to just approach it from a sense of openness and just problem solving and collaborating. And you know, I'm a writer and musician and I compose, and so I spend a lot of time alone creating. So it was really refreshing and wonderful to work with other people and to collaborate. And to fast forward to the very end, one of the great things at the gallery opening, which you saw in the credits in the film, you saw the beautiful gallery opening that happened, was seeing people actually read the poems in person, because so often, you know, you write something, you create a song, and you send it out into the world. You don't really get to see people experience it. So that was a very powerful and moving opportunity. I think the first time, Rafiq Anadol said, you know, scientists and artists ask questions. And for those who've been to the gallery, or if you're planning to go, you'll see that every part of the installations has a question to it. And so when I was approached by Liz, the question she asked me was, if Earth could speak, what would it say? And I was like, that question seems both, you know, kind of very simple, but also profoundly complex, and I can't even wrap my head around it. And what are we supposed to do with that? And she's like, well, we have data, we can make poems. I'm like, okay, well then, how do we get from data to poems? And so in the beginning, I was very skeptical and unsure about how can you just manifest poems from a bunch of data. And so I think it sort of parallels, and it was really great to hear Saskia and Shane's process, because I think they also went through a similar sort of forest of doubt and uncertainty before sort of working on it, and then starting to have those breakthroughs. And I think for us too, is just a question like, how does this work? What is this? What are we gonna do? Okay, and then just starting to break things down into their fundamental elements and saying, okay, we can assign different types of data to different forms of poetry. So I think we had a clear kind of division of labor, and then the more we worked together, the more we just sort of melded and merged, you know, kind of like the lenses that Richie was talking about.
And then I have to follow up from Rafi. How do you follow up from Rafi? So we have been working on this project with the studio for about 2.5 years, and I always say that it's been a labor of love, and it really has. So I think the original story was that David and Dan were doing different site visits. They had talked to the Getty, and they were doing different site visits of galleries that they could have the exhibit at. And our director had said, hey, these two guys from JPL came into the gallery one day. They're working on a Getty PST thing. Do you think it's something we should do? And I was like, absolutely, we cannot pass this up. This is a huge moment for the city if we're able to do this. So thank God we had a very supportive director at the time who was very supportive of the project. So much so that the Glendale Arts and Culture Commission matched the Getty grant, and we were able to contribute another $200,000 to the project, which has been phenomenal. So, as you can probably imagine, there's a behind the scenes of a behind the scenes. So I'm sure Richie and Nick could do a whole documentary on everything that happened behind the scenes in the soap opera that we went through to get here. But I am so grateful to David and Dan, who were just the best partners on this collaboration. And there were so many times where I would call them and I'd be like, oh my God, they're gonna get so mad at me. And they'd be like, don't worry, we got it, it's okay. And they were just such wonderful, easy partners to work with, and it's been so wonderful to be able to collaborate on this project.
That's so great.
And, I mean, isn't like art and technology, those terminologies, something important to Glendale as well?
Absolutely. So our economic development department is very much in charge of our Glendale Tech Week, and we are one of the first, so we call it the city of first. We have a lot of tech companies that have grown and were bred in the city of Glendale, so this seemed like a perfect collaboration based on what the city's known for, so it's been great.
That's really great. Well, I did want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A from the audience. Michael's got a microphone. I'm already seeing hands shoot up. This is amazing. But one final question for these guys. Dan and David, really quickly, can you tell us why this show is called Blended Worlds?
So, okay, thank you. Blended Worlds, it's easy to think that Blended Worlds is about blending art and science. But we're sort of using the process of blending art and science to do something different. We're really trying to figure out how we can blend or find a blend of our humanity with the rest of the natural world. One of the things that came up through our research repeatedly, we invited many people to come in and we interviewed them and things, and two things really came out from that, and some of it like very adamant, strong responses, a lot from our scientists. We're saying we are nature. That's a kind of something that you say we are nature. You know, of course we are nature. People say we're also stardust, right? It makes sense up here, but it was hard for it to make sense in like here, right? In an emotional way. And so what we set out to do, and the other thing that came up was the idea of mutualism and how that's important for our future. So one of the things we were trying to do is we gravitated to this phrase, we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. Well, we wondered, what if we could start shaping tools that allow us to take that phrase, we are nature, and feel it in a more realistic way? Sort of in the way we describe that is by creating technologies that allow us to develop new forms of relationships with the natural world, ones that allow us to care about it more. There's an ongoing kind of concern in the sciences, especially when you talk to some earth scientists, that the data and the science has failed to convince people that there's a problem. And so one of the things that we're trying to do in Blended Worlds is create this third space where we can start to develop a greater sense of empathy for the other thing, whatever that is, whatever aspect of nature. And so when we talk about nature, we talk about the grand, like sort of NASA version of nature, which is all of our universe, much of which we haven't even understood yet or know what's out there. And so some of it is sort of having empathy for the other that you may not understand, and trying to create a relationship where you can care about that other thing more and become better stewards of it. And reaching that point of understanding the use of empathy, Dr. Lois Rawson was a huge support in that. So thank you.
Yeah.
You can hold it. For Dan and Dave, can you talk about the process for developing the specific pieces in the gallery? Did it spring out of those workshops with 100 Post-its on the wall? Or did you pair up scientists and artists and say, what do you think you want to do? Where'd they come from?
Well, one of the challenges of this show was that 80% of it was brand new. And so that meant that like a week before the show, we were still like, what's it gonna be? We don't know. So it was a little terrifying. But yeah, so we found different artists that we felt sort of lived in the worlds that we were imagining. And then, so then we partnered them up with, we kind of, David talks about doing speed dating. So we'd kind of have a bunch of scientists and engineers, and ultimately you want people that bond together in one way or another. And so they spent time with each other, they spent time at JPL, and then they'd go away and they'd start to think about things and they'd ask more questions. We'd go find more resources for them. And so eventually that's how the pieces sort of came together.
Yeah, no, I
right?
think, yeah, that's right.
Okay, for the process of making this film and figuring out how to tell the story of this exhibit, how did you decide which pieces in the exhibit to focus on to tell that story? Like, what made you decide to choose? Like, I feel like we were kind of like focusing on two or three main pieces in this exhibit. Why did you decide those pieces, or like to tell the story of what the exhibit meant?
Thank God there's someone like Nick there to like put up guardrails and kind of look, because how do I choose? They're all so cool and so fascinating for so many different reasons that I was just like,
Yeah, that's a very good question. A lot of it is logistics, to be honest. It's which is not a exciting sort of way to look at film production, but a lot of it really is availability. Can we get rights? Things like that. Accessibility, and how much accessibility, because as you watched a film, we didn't just show up for one day.
No.
These guys went back and back and back, and what you get out of that is you get the process of the creation of the artwork from beginning to end up until the date of the exhibition. And so we needed that level of access. So a lot of the artists, it kind of just shook out that way. And also, we wanted to make sure we weren't kind of doubling up on similar types of artworks. We really wanted to show something that we felt hadn't been explored before. Poetry doesn't get the documentary treatment all that much. And here we have an opportunity to show our City of Glendale Poet Laureate, working with Liz De La Torre, who works with the studio. So that was a very attractive pair right there. And we felt like we only have an hour to tell this story. And in between that hour, we're also trying to tell the history of JPL and how they've intersected with art. So there's kind of like, it's not budgeting money, it's budgeting time. And how much time we can give each story so that it feels full. So yeah, really it's part logistics, it's part what we think needs to be explored or shared, and it's kind of like all of that. You just sort of make that decision. And that's the kind of the fun part. I mean, I wouldn't call it casting, but it kind of is, right? I hope that answers your question. Now, an important part of casting was Dan and David. They didn't approach us with the intent of being stars of their own documentary film. I would even venture to say they didn't even want to be on camera, except just to provide what was necessary. They wanted to make sure that the artists got the majority of exposure. But as a producer, the question I always ask when telling a story is, where is the heart? And I found their relationship very heartful. Like, they care so much about the work that they do. And we had a lot of conversations about this, and it became a point where we're like, let's put more Dan and David in.
Yeah. let's open it up with them exploring the BK Auditorium.
Yeah.
To follow up on what you just said, I found it rather biased in a sense toward the art side of things. And I'm wondering why, you know, if you think of the theme, art and science collide, I think it doesn't really follow through. It's more artists exploring science. The emphasis was on the art, not the science.
Yeah.
I agree with you, and I think that has to do with the fact that our show is called Artbound, and our documentary series really tries to focus on showing the artistic process more so. So you're not wrong about that, but that is also just the DNA of what our show is to explore the arts.
You're right.
Follow up on a question here too, because as a native Angelino and knowing that this whole region has had an incredible history in all kinds of science, the aerospace industry, any number of different parts, we really have had a limited number of exhibits. And I think Dan and David, you guys deserve the biggest congratulations. This is a remarkable exhibit that I'd encourage anyone who has not been to go and see, and you've got about 3 weeks or so before it does have to close over at the Brand. Is there a second life for this exhibit?
Well, I'll kill two birds with one stone here on that, because I love your comment about the sciences. And one of the things that, because we were very conscious about that to make sure that it was not one-sided, especially within the collaborations and the way that those collaborations were treated. And so that's exactly why we treated everything like a collaboration and allowed enough room for those relationships to mature and people to work together on these projects. And then the other thing that was really important, I think this goes to the point of where could it live on, is that, you know, one of the big missions of NASA is to provide data to the public. And so, you know, you notice that we were focused on the use of data in a lot of these projects. We actually we don't call them even art projects. We call them everything we call an experiment. And those experiments, because that was like a nice neutral ground between the artists and the scientists working together. So in all of the experiments that use data, in some cases the artists and the scientists were working together to create something that was the first use of that data in that way. But we are also providing that data to the general public too. So we made a website at JPL. If you go to Blended Worlds JPL, all of that data is being released and formatted in more usable ways so that other artists out there can take it and create with it as well. And hopefully if anybody would like to travel the exhibit, yeah, please let us know. But right now, there's no other big plans of it going anywhere else.
Yes, and for this, so have you then, separate from the documentary, captured it in multimedia and other modular elements? Because you have such a beautiful temporal life for what you've created. And similar question with the documentary, how is this propagating into schools, other communities, any life in addition to PBS STEM? How is this being propagated for other communities?
That's a great question. For the film itself, how is it going to end up? That's a great point, and that's something that's actually been on my mind for quite a bit. I think it's our responsibility from the filmmaker side and the production company to start just like reaching out to professors who might show it in a class, or just anybody who would be able to get eyes on it, so that we can start to ask the same questions throughout the city of Glendale, outside Pasadena and Glendale area, all throughout Los Angeles. I think it's important to do that. So that's a push of ours. I think as we start to enter the new year, I think it's a great question, and I think it's important to do.
If I could add, everything we do is provided free to the public. And if any teacher reaches out to us and requests to screen it for their students, or if they wanted to put on a similar event such as this, we will always say yes, provided that the event is free to the public. And I love public engagements and community engagements like this, activations, and we would love to see our content played in front of classrooms. But there is an effort there, but it's a little bit more, I would say, social and casual. I hope that answers your
I
question.
think if I was in college, I would really want to see this, so I'm trying to get out there. High school, yeah. even better.
High school, I even younger, absolutely.
Yeah, and as part of the exhibit too, we also created a curriculum that went along with the exhibit. It's very simple, but it works for, I would say probably 6th grade through 12th grade, based on 433. It's based on opening up your senses and essentially paying attention and then creating from what you understand from that moment.
Any final questions? Peter, how are we doing on time?
I think we're at time.
4 minutes up.
Okay, great. Well, speak now or forever hold your peace. We got one.
So when you began this project, did it turn out from the beginning to be very different than what you thought it was going to be at the end? Like your concept of it before you even really began to where it went and developed, and did it turn into something completely different?
Yes, yeah. I think, again, if it were just us and we were making something on our own, Ben, the DP and editor for the film, who's my creative partner, it would make far less structural sense. It would just be kind of, you know what I mean? There's a cut of this that would have gone in that direction. When we have someone like PBS and we have someone with the experience that Nick has, and a dedication to bring it in, we're able to keep an understanding of what we actually want to create based on what PBS is looking to do, but also while honoring the filmmakers and what we want to make. So it's a collaboration. Having said that, over time, it changes constantly. I mean, like I said,
That's art.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's the fun part of it. It's also the heartbreaking part of it a little bit. I started out by saying to the Dan and David content because there was quite a bit of it was about them in the studio and then the exhibit and then the question of art and science, right? And it just became like building blocks that we had to move around based on time, based on time, really. Because this thing would have been a feature-length film, realistically, if we could make it.
And it's a television show, so it's not like a feature film where you may dedicate years to the project. I think we spent,
yeah, right.
10 months? 9 months
something like that.
on this, yeah. So it's a very accelerated sort of schedule. But when you have shepherds like Dan and David that are just willing to open their doors, make all the right introductions, it certainly helps the process. But to answer your question, no project, I think, ever ends up the way you originally started with, because you learn during the process, right? And as you learn, you will make changes to reflect that newer understanding.
Yeah, Larry Bell, art is a teacher. That is exactly the case with the filmmaking aspect from our point of view. So.
Well, it looks like we've got one final. Maybe we'll cut it off with this final question, since poor Peter has been here since 10 a.m. this morning.
Sorry, I don't know if this is too big of a question, so maybe you can't answer it. But since the exhibit is the blending between art and science, what is the difference, or what is your personal definitions between the two? If there are two definite things that you can blend together, is there a difference?
Do you want to answer that, right? Because you did the work.
But I could also quote, I
they're
think
both
it's
useless.
Picasso, and I've heard that Balanchine said this, and one of my mentors said it, and that is that art is a lie in the service of truth. And that science is the truth, and art is sometimes having to bend it to help us understand that truth. You can pick up on that.
Yeah, I think Rafi, I think could probably talk about this. I think what I observed is that people on a conceptual level, on a philosophical level, there's a lot of agreement. There are language gaps, and I think there's a lot of conversations trying to understand how there may be different ways of seeing the world or different perspectives, and the language in which that describes those perspectives sometimes is a little different, but the desire to explore and to push boundaries is definitely, very much, and creativity and imagination and all of those things are very much shared by both sides. So, once again, I think we were trying to use that combination of art and science as a unified process to do the next step. That by itself, just as like the end goal, for us that wasn't the end, it was the beginning. It's like the use of art and science together to do this greater goal of allowing people to find new ways to connect. And that was sort of the way we approached it. And we know that the conversation of what is art and science, that's a big one, but we just said, we've been doing it for 20 years, let's just try to, it's a hard thing to answer, and so we just tried to, shoot for the next level.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, I mean, many things are going off for me, but one thing that comes to mind is I think in the human brain, the part that connects the two hemispheres is the corpus callosum. If I'm not mistaken, I'm sure there's people here who know way more about this than I do, but even if you have these two separate systems, there's this path that connects them and integrates them. And the great Vietnamese Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this concept of interbeing, where all things are sort of connected to each other. So if you pick up a piece of paper, when you pick up a piece of paper, you're also picking up the tree that it came from, and the air, and the sunlight, and the soil, and the worms, and all the things that were involved in making it possible for that piece of paper to manifest. So I think of things like disciplines like art and science, or neuroscience and pottery, as all part of a greater system, which is the pale blue dot, So that comes to mind. And I know for me personally, I've just spent a lot more time looking at the stars. I usually wake up pretty early in the morning to get up before our toddler so I can have some creative time. And so when I go outside, it's dark. And I've just spent a lot more time ever since working on Blended Worlds, just looking at the stars and figuring out the constellations. And thanks to this project, I think I've gained a much deeper understanding of forms of poetry, because developing Earth Speaks, I had to think a lot about, okay, what are different forms of poetry we could assign to different data sets? So that really just pushed me to think about the real rigor of linguistic structure, which I know is also a scientific study. And yeah, the last thing I'll just say is I've been sort of reflecting a lot on sort of the poetry of community and all the creative things that a city can do as a sort of public institution to make things like all of this possible.
Great. Well, I think that's a fantastic note to end on. So thank you guys so much.
If I can just... I'm representing one of the three arms that put together this day of symposia, the archives. I'd like to acknowledge Peter Callipy and Claudia Von Spector. I don't think is still here, but she was responsible for one of the panels that we had today. And I really want to thank David Delgado, Dan Goods, great colleagues over at JPL for what they've helped us end the day with. And I want to thank all of the panelists, some who are here, possibly still watching, other panelists give their time, this group of panelists, and our moderator today, and all of you for joining us for this event. Thank you very much.